Bill is here, and what he's going to do is he's going to talk to us about the same thing that his book covers. He's an author of the book Further Faster, The Vital Few Steps That Take the Guesswork Out of Growth, and that is exactly what we need to figure out right now. What is the guesswork that is actually holding us back from growing faster? Bill, welcome. Stage is yours.
Great. Thanks. All right. Hi, everybody. And there are my slides. Excellent. So thanks for having me. Thanks for hanging out on this weekend and joining me in what we call our library in my house. You can see the pictures and things behind me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through what I've learned over about 30 years of studying business and success, and what are the few things that some really great businesses do, and really the great businesses do over that time frame. And I like to start every one of these presentations with a couple of questions. And I usually ask them either of the audience live or we do the chat, but I'll ask some of them sort of rhetorically. But I'll ask you to also ask yourself these questions. And the first one is, hang on, make sure I can move this thing. I guess I can't. Hang on. All right. So the first one is, if you're a leader of a team or a leader of a company, is how much time do you spend working in the business versus on the business? Now, I've asked this of hundreds and hundreds of leaders, CEOs, business owners, et cetera. And I get two answers that are the most popular. One is that it's either 80% in and 20% on, or 90% in and 10% on. So love for you to sort of reflect that. If you want to share that in any of in the feed, et cetera, that'd be great. And the next question I have is, what would it mean to you if you could accurately predict the revenue of your business, the profit, cash, the widgets, meaning the things that you sell, the most profitable things that you sell, and the people month after month, 3 years into the future? What would that mean to you? So just take a second and just think about that. If you're able to write it down in front of you, or just chat it, put it into your phone or something, that'd be great. And ask you to keep it in front of you as I go through this presentation, and to remind yourself of that sort of what you're looking to have done. Okay, so let's start with the bad news. And the bad news is that most businesses die. Here are some stats that you'll see from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I have seen similar stats from the Small Business Administration. If you start a business in this particular graph, if you start a business in 1994, you have about a 50% chance of making it 5 years. You have about a 25% chance of making it another 10, and another about a 16% chance of making another 10. So most businesses go out of business. Now, if you look at this graph, you can see that most those businesses that are above the line are the ones that have died, but not everyone thrives. Many businesses struggle. If you don't die, that's actually probably better because it's over. But most businesses struggle, and very, very few thrive. And that's sort of what I looked at in over the last 30 years, and really in the last 5 or 6, I've studied it a lot and put it into my book, is of what are the things that great businesses do that actually not just survive, but thrive. And I'm going to walk you through, I haven't quite figured out how to do this, walk you through the steps of the slides and these builds, so it'll take a little bit of work. So most businesses, when they start, they think, what I can do is this hockey stick, right? This is sort of the metaphor of hockey stick, which is, I know we're going to struggle for a while, but at some point there's going to be an inflection, and I'm going to take off, and I'm going to head off, up and to the right. But that's not really what happens. It's usually a little bit different from that. And most businesses at some point hit a plateau and then start to drop down. So those businesses that do that usually have something that got in their way. And I'd ask you, normally I would ask you to sort of write them into the chat. But think of a few reasons why in your own head of why you think a business might go out of business. I'm going to give you some myself. I will tell you that, I don't know, about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to look into this. And so I just Googled it and said, give me all the reasons why businesses go out of business. And I just kept writing them down. I think it was 35 or so, I stopped. There are lots of there are lots of reasons why businesses go out of business. And here are some that you can see as well. It's, you have a poor business model, or you didn't hire very well. Most businesses die of indigestion, not of starvation. You do too many things, etc. So one of the things that you want to be thinking about as a business is sort of what really is your job as a leader of a business. And once you get through that knothole of your business and you start to have some predictability to it, especially if you want to grow, your job becomes less running the business, and it should be more thinking about how to predict the future of the business. Because you're going to find that your job is to predict that next growth curve. So you have this one growth curve, et cetera. And a good example of this is sort of Steve Jobs in Apple. And when he came back, the first thing he did, they were on the downslope. When he came back the second time to save the company, they were running out of business. They were running out of money. I think they had about 90 days of cash left. So the first thing he had to do was save the company. And so what he did is he took, I've heard 23, I've also heard 19. He took a whole bunch of the product lines, a dozen or more, and he cut it down to 4. So he could extend that top of that curve a little bit more, because he didn't know what the next thing was. And as many of us know, the next thing was actually iTunes, and then it was iPod, and then it was the iPhone, and then it was the iPad. So you could imagine curve after curve above this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 curves stacking on themselves. And that's what he's done over and over again. And that's what the really great leaders do. They know that whatever their cash cow is now is not going to be that way for a long time. It may last years, it may last decades, but at some point that's going to start to fade. And as technology and business over the last 10 or 15 years has changed, that has accelerated. Those business, the drop down in business, the plateauing has happened more rapidly. So what I have folks do is I like them to focus on a few things. If you want to focus on the future, I've found that there are really 3 things that the really great businesses do. And those are, 1, to remember that performance is a team sport. Performance of any business is done by usually teams of teams. It's rare that it's an individual that is driving a business, especially if they're growing. There's some work done by ADP, and they say that about 80%, a little bit more than 80% of us who are in a business are on at least one team. There's about 70% of those people who are on 2 or more teams, and many of those teams aren't actually in the org chart. So learning how to run a team, how to build and grow and run a team is a skill that we should be teaching pretty much all of our team members, because at some point, someone may be leading a team and they may not have the skills of doing that. So that's one thing that I've learned is we really have to figure out how to not only attract, build, great, and grow and manage big teams and lead great teams. The next is businesses that are run well, that have scalability to them, are run in a systematic fashion. And this really revolves around 2 things, strategy and execution, which I'll get to a little bit later on. But they have a system that they run. And then lastly, cash is the primary financial growth metric. A lot of people talk about revenue and profit, and yes, they're good things. There's a really worn out saying that revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. And the reason that is because cash is an antecedent to growth. You have to spend in front of growth if you want to grow as a business. So you have to really plan ahead of time. When I work with my clients, we do 3-year planning stints. And then we say, okay, how much is that going to cost us? How many people do we have to hire? How much are there software tools we have to buy? Is there a factory we have to build in order to manage this growth? And say, okay, how much is that? Now let's build the plan to generate us that cash. You can certainly get it from outside sources, but it's much better to get it from an internal source. So you're not beholden to other folks. So let's talk a little bit about how that works at a high level. again, most businesses sort of go on that line, that one straight line or that hockey stick. But I've found that doesn't necessarily happen. You'll find that it's really kind of messy. It doesn't quite go the way you want. It's never a straight line. And this is just one of the versions that it could possibly be. But usually when you're growing a business and you want to be a leader of a business, you have to make sure you understand that if you want to be a leader, the one thing that all leaders do really well, and we can argue whether the leader is a great leader or a good leader or a bad leader. There's lots of opinions about what makes a great leader, but they all have some sort of a vision, because they all have done one thing in common, at least, which is they have created followers, and followers want to know, where are we going? And that's this vision. So that's sort of this thing out in the future. But they also have understood that they need to build an identity, and that's, who are we? What are we all about? How do we behave? These are core values, core purpose, core objectives of the business itself. And these are sort of the lighthouses, if you will, on either side, the beacons that drive the business. Because if you grow for growth's sake, there's a great saying, which is, growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell. If you grow just for growth's sake, often you regret it. And sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 5 or 10 years. I've heard some stories where it's a decade later that they realize a decision they made was one of the reasons they almost went out of business. So you got to have those two things that are part of the pattern that you grow on. And then what you need to do is really understand that your vision drives your strategy, and your strategy will drive your tactics. They are connected. This is very much up Jim Collins' alley. And let me just connect these here. And there are a number of things that you have when you are building those, that sort of milestones along the way. Those of you who aren't familiar with this term, BHAG, this is a Jim Collins term from his book, Good to Great. And a number of other of his books as well. I also call it sort of a courageous consequence. If you do all these things, if you have a vision, you have to have some courage. And if you do the things right up leading up to it, you'll have some sort of courageous consequence, which is also called a BHAG. BHAG stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. It's something like, one of the most well-known ones is from President Kennedy in the 60s, which says that we're going to send a man to the moon and return him safely to the earth within the decade. So within 10 years, they were going to do something that was basically deemed impossible at the time. And then you have a number of other milestones along the way. I'll just put them all up here. And those are, you sort of have this long 10, 20, 30-year vision. You break it down into smaller bits. And the first thing I recommend is do a 3-year version of it, which is much more clear. Some of the folks that I work with call it a 3HAG, which is sort of a play on the BHAG, but 3HAG stands for 3-year highly achievable goal. This is something that you feel much more confident in, that you can plan for. Then you break the 3-year goal into 1-year goals and then quarterly goals. And some of my clients go down to monthly and even weekly goals, depending on how disciplined you are in terms of the things that you do. And a number of the things that you can really pay attention to are the things along the lines of driving your strategy, which you can see here in the 2 columns that I put. You have a number of things that you can have around strategy, which involves core value, core purpose, your 3HAG. You have a core customer that's part of that. And then, of course, you want to do your more tactical things around the 3-year planning, the 1-year planning, and quarterly planning, which are really sort of the more popular things. Now, the reason that you do this is that when you have your vision that's out into the future, and then you have your identity, and you put these things together, the decisions that you make in the middle are a lot easier, because you compare them to, is this getting us closer to where we want to end up? And does it violate who we are, what we're all about, how we behave, what we're good at, etc.? And if the answer is yes to the first one and no to the second one, I mean, yes, it's getting us closer to where we want to go, and it doesn't violate who we are, then it helps you to make that decision faster. So it starts to add velocity. When you sort of put these bookmarks, if you will, or bookends on your thinking, the decisions that you make in the middle are a lot easier to make. So I've given you some of the good news, a little bad news, and sort of how to do it. So let me break it down into a little bit more detail on how this all happens. And I'm going to build this a little bit as we go. And I'm going to use this as a metaphor of a house. So what are the things that you'd have to do? And these are things that I teach, that a lot of folks teach that are in my space, coaching and business growth. And so if you're gonna build a strong house as the metaphor, the first thing you have to do is have a really strong foundation. And this foundation is basically what is called your cultural system, right? It starts with you, the leader, the person. You are the standard bearer of the culture. You're helping to make sure that the values are the right values that are core to you. You're sharing your core purpose. Why did I start this business? What dent was I trying to make in the universe, et cetera, and a number of other things that are part of that, including the BHAG that we already mentioned. And then you have a number of other things that you add, and I'm going to do two of them at once because they're both sort of connected. One is you have sort of this leadership system, meaning that you have a cohesive leadership team. And to me, what that means is you have a group of people that are helping you at the top of the organization, if you will, and you all know how to fight in a healthy way. Disagreement is a good thing in a leadership team because you want to get to diversity of thought, or also known as cognitive diversity, which means that you have to explore something from all sides. I would caution you, if you're in a leadership team and you say, we all seem to think alike and we're all connected, that's actually not a good thing. If that happens, I recommend that you take the other side and just say, imagine this thing that we just thought was wonderful was completely wrong. What would happen? How would we deal with that? Or what are some other ways that would violate this thing? Or how would competitors beat us at this? So you need to be able to fight in a healthy way. You want your team to disagree. But eventually you want them to commit to whatever you decide and align on whatever decision you make in that area. The next is on the other side is this human system or your talent system. And this is where you have your A players, right? Or your up and coming players. A players are the best investment you'll ever make in your business. They're typically 2 to 3 times more productive than anyone else in the organization. And you don't typically pay them that amount. You're typically paying them a little bit more than everyone else. So they're such a great investment for your business. The next thing is sort of rounds out is pretty much everyone else on the organization, your team leaders, anyone else that's not reporting to you that might be leading teams, as well as the rest of the organization, the frontline workers, et cetera. So if you'll notice this house right here, this is sort of the foundation and the framing of the house. And if you look closely, this is all about people. People really are the structure that holds the rest of the business together. But now, so we have this great structure and we have this great frame. Now we have to make sure that we run the house, right? So if you're going to run a house, if we want to stay in metaphor, you got to have plumbing and electricity and heat. You have to have food and appliances and all these things that make the house go. And these are basically your strategy and your execution and your cash that I've already mentioned. Well, hang on one sec. I think I got them up. Okay. So if you'll see, these things are connected because they rely on each other. Great businesses have a strong strategy. It's not an awesome strategy typically to start. It's decent. And then what happens is you have a strategy that you execute on. And the strategy hopefully differentiates you from some other some other rival in your industry or set of rivals. So you set this strategy, and then you execute upon it, and then you find out where you weren't quite right, or maybe things changed since you had started that, and then you change your strategy a little bit. For those of you who are Simon Sinek fans, this is really The Infinite Game, which is his most recent book, is this sort of infinite strategy to execution to strategy to execution. Strategy is really driving the top line of your business. Execution is driving the bottom line of your business, and that drives your cash, which sits in the middle. Great businesses really focus on these 3 things, which are the team, which again is the outside of this house, the frame and the foundation, which really are the underpinnings of the team. Then you have this great execution system and strategy and execution system that you rely upon and keep improving upon on a regular basis, which then drives the cash, which allows you to keep growing, keep investing in the business, allows you to pay your A players a little bit better, attract more of them, et cetera. and drives more to the bottom line for you. And then lastly, we don't have this in where I live, which is I'm just outside of Boston. Houses here are usually built on bedrock or granite. So, but in many parts of the country, a lot of houses are built on soil. And if you could build a really great house, a wonderful house that works really well, but it could sink into the ground. And this is the last system that I'm going to talk about, which is really the foundational system. And that relies on four things. One is that you have created that vivid vision, right, that I talked about earlier, right? Where are we headed in the future, 10, 20, 30 years out? Here's what it looks like when we get there. You want to write it in such a way. And then you've sort of taken that and brought it into sort of a 3-year version of that. You know, here's what it looks like in 3 years if we do these things well. Also, if you're looking to grow, there are two things that you're doing on a regular basis. If you're looking to grow your business, you have to get used to the fact that it's about change. And it's about decision making. If you're a leader in your leadership team, you're making decisions on a regular basis, hopefully not too many, but really the really important ones. And that's driving change. So you have to have some sort of change process framework. How do we do change in our business? And it should be the same way you do change, no matter what the change is. It could be a tiny little change that takes 5 minutes. It could be something that takes 5 months or 5 years. It should be the same exact process that you have. And I have some things, I put them in my book on how to do that. And then also decision making. A lot of folks, when I ask them, how do you guys make decisions? And they kind of look at me and say, well, we just kind of talk about it and then we decide. There's no real process that we go through. Great businesses and great leaders have a specific decision-making process that they go through, and they use the same process no matter what decision they're making. I like to break it down into two things. First is, what kind of decision are we making? Is it simple? Is it complicated? Is it complex? Is it chaotic? And with COVID coming, about a year ago, we were in a chaotic decision-making, right? We were just trying to figure stuff out. Often we just made a decision, see if it made sense, and then if it didn't, we fixed it. So first you have to figure out what kind of decision are you making, and then you have some sort of process that you do with that. Again, in my book and in a lot of my writings, I talk about how to make decisions. And lastly is what's called Neuro Leadership. And this really is, how do you lead with the brain in mind? And because at the end of the day, we're all flawed human beings. We're all kind of crazy. We're irrational, we're impulsive, we're highly emotional beings. And so we're not always going to act the way that is expected or you'd like them to act. So you have to understand that. You have to understand how the brain reacts to how you as a leader interact with them, how you give feedback to someone, how you teach someone how to do something, inadvertently putting the brain into threat mode without even knowing it. So really understanding those few things is really important. So to round this out, and I'll review this here in just a sec, is there are a few things that you need to do as a business to create this environment so you can create your own future. My book is taking the guesswork out of growth, and basically it's allowing you to predict the future of your business. And the best way to predict anything is to create it yourself. And that's what you're doing here. You're creating the conditions, the environment, the atmosphere, to be able to predict how things are going to go in the next 1, 2, and 3 years, because you're the one pulling the strings. You're moving the knobs to do that. And this metaphor of the house is really the things that I've seen that the great businesses do that combine those three things that I mentioned already. And those are, one is that, hang on, let me just get a few of them up there. All right, so first, as I talked about earlier, most businesses die or struggle, very few thrive. The leader's main value is not to run the day-to-day. Once you get out of that sort of that knothole, you get past the struggle of a startup of the business. Your job is really to predict the future. And the best way to predict the future is to have other people run the business, because the future creation is about insight, it's about innovation, it's about creation. And most people get their best ideas when they're not using their brain to do something. I ask this a lot of folks. I say, when do you get your best ideas? And typically it's in the shower or in a run or just sort of being bored. That means your mind is quiet. And so if you want to be able to do that, you have to be able to keep your mind quiet, and having a line outside your door or having to make 1,000 decisions in a day is not a quiet mind. So pushing the decisions down into the organization, the authority of the decisions down to where they should be, is one of your premier goals to be able to try to achieve. And then lastly, you want to consistently do three things, which I've already talked about, and I'll just review them here one more time. And that is that you want to remember that performance is a team sport. Read stuff from Amy Edmondson or Marcus Buckingham or even David Rock, who's the Neuro Leadership guy that I've talked about earlier. They talk about how to really think about how to build teams and what's important with teams. I put a bunch of their stuff in my book on that. I synthesize it down. So if you want to do the Reader's Digest version, you can read my book to do that. Remember that you want to build a coherent system. A coherent meaning that it goes up to your vision, but also down to what it means to the individual doing the job. So they can see, I can see what I'm doing today, how it relates to where we're going and how I'm contributing to that success. And then lastly, you want to remember that your key growth metric is cash. So a lot of folks ask me, so what's the one key takeaway that I would want to advise people to do? If you're the leader of an organization or even just a leader of a team, I highly recommend that you write down a vision. So it's easy to do the leader of an organization. So I'll do the leader of a team. If you're leading a team, let's just say you're leading marketing or sales or operations, what you want to do is write down, if this team were functioning on all cylinders, it was working really well, what would that look like? How would people be interacting with each other? How would the things that we're doing, how would they manifest themselves in the organization? And write all those things down and share them with the team and say, here's what I think that if we were working at 100% optimization, what it would look like. What is the ideal outcome of this team? Again, you can do it for the organization as well. And then share that with your team and have them look at it and give you feedback on it, meaning feedback not necessarily to change your vision, but to have you make sure that you've written in a clear way. Because often the vision is very clear to us, but if you want to make sure that it's being realized, you have to have the followers of the vision to be very clear on it as well. So you want to make sure that they have clarity. If they give you some ideas that you didn't think about, you want to add because it makes sense for you, then great, you can add it to your vision. But that would be my one key takeaway. And then lastly, I'll give you this, is one of the things I've written, and it's in the book, but you can get this on that URL there. And I think you can get the slides if you want. I'd recommend that if you're the leader of the organization, you take this checklist and you have your senior leadership team fill this out individually and just score yourself from 1 to 10 on how you are in each of these areas. And that'll get a sense to you, for you, of how are we doing? Are we putting the things in place? Are we setting up the structure and the principles and the conditions to have a much better growth of our business, have people be happier, more fulfilled, not take over your life as a leader, etc. That's another thing that I have you do. You can do it on your own, and then just have the grades put up on a spreadsheet or on a whiteboard or somewhere, and then talk about what the differences are in those scores from you and your people. I've done this dozens and dozens of times. The leader is always surprised by the answers. He or she thinks that things are going much better than they actually are. But it's a great place to know. At least you get a baseline. And with that, I will say thank you. And I don't know if you have any time for questions, but that's what I had for you today.
Hi, Bill. I'm Catherine. And actually, we spoke on the phone probably, a month ago or so.
You did. How are you, Catherine?
Good. Thank you for being here and for sharing your information with us, because I know that all of us can benefit from that. So my question is when you have a 3HAG, how often do you end up missing that mark, or it takes longer than the 3 years that you are hoping it would?
So it depends on when you do it. When you first do it, so far I'm part of a group of about 100 other coaches who do the same process. And we've all found generally the same thing is the first time we do it, the leadership team is a little optimistic. And then what we do is we say, that's fine, and we go through the first year. And then what we do is we do it again. So we make another 3HAG. So the one you did the year prior to is the 2HAG. Right now it's a 2-year highly achievable goal. And then we adjust the 3-HAG. Sometimes the 3-HAG that you do the second time is below what your original one was.
Okay.
And even though you've given yourself another year. And that's okay. As long as you're making progress, it's all about making progress and having those conversations. So you just keep adjusting every year, and you keep rolling it forward every year.
Okay, one more quick question since I have the mic. If you're just starting out building systems, it can be totally overwhelming. So where do you start?
Which system do you work on?
Yes.
Work on people first. You always work on people. And the first person you work on is yourself.
Gotcha.
If you want to be a leader of an organization that I talked about earlier, that are the thrive, the few percentage pieces that thrive, the thing that I recommend that you do is you have to get very comfortable with, I don't know, I need help, and I'm sorry. Because when they start to see you as a human being, they'll start to realize that they can also come to a situation and be human and throw out crazy ideas or say, I really screwed up there, I'm sorry, or I need some help myself. Until you start doing that, you'll never get the full benefit of the team. You'll be what Jim Collins calls the genius with 1,000 helpers. And it will be really on you, or really just a few of you, to pull this organization forward. And that's okay in the short term because it's just a few of you. But as you grow and you add people, it just becomes heavier and heavier pulling these people along. You want them pushing you as well. So that's typically where you start. Start with one yourself, and then surround yourself with a great team. Everyone that reports to you as a leader should be an A player. If they're not, then you're doing some of their job.
That's really good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, it looks like we have time for one more question. Well, it says 6 minutes, but you have a question?
Yeah, can I?
Is it going to be a good one though?
I don't know if it's
Don't
good
come
or
up
not.
here if it's not a good one.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm coming down. So, hey, Bill, thanks. First of all, I have to tell you, I don't think, hopefully nobody else is listening that's been a speaker, but there's been some really good conceptual discussions. I love that this is like rubber meets the road. These are things that we can really start to look at ourselves and decide, how do we make these changes? And I actually have more than one question, but with like 5 minutes left, okay. But just kind of want to ask this. When you look at it, when you're in a growth mode, and then you kind of hit a plateau, and you wonder, are we done growing, or what do we have to do different to increase that growth? How do you know? What's the steps you take to kind of make that decision?
Yeah, so if you really want to grow as a business, you have to make sure you understand the arena that you're in first. If you're, and I know David mentioned earlier, Jeff Bezos, right? Mm-hmm. His arena was massive, right? Yeah. And he knew that he started with books, but he wanted to be the world's supermarket. So his growth is basically limitless. But some people pick a smaller market. So you have to really understand the context that you're in. But I would say most people, the reason that their growth stops is that they've forgotten what got them there in the first place. Marshall Goldsmith has a great book, which is, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that applies here as well, is that the way I look at it is when you first start out, imagine this sort of a circle, and there's usually 2 to 5 of you in most businesses, somewhere in that range. And that's how you start. And imagine on the outside of that, you have your team, your customers, and then the market, your rivals, your suppliers, your partners, et cetera. That's sort of the rest. And when you're that small, you have no choice but to be in touch with them. It's by osmosis. But what happens is then you grow, because if you're paying attention and you're really listening to your employees and you're really paying attention to your customers, et cetera, you'll grow, and then you'll add another circle, and then you'll add another circle. And what happens is you remove yourself from those constituencies that got you there in the first place, and you've forgotten to be in touch with them or to get that information. And that's why most businesses stop, right? Is that they get insular. And they think about how smart we are, the 5 or 6 of us, how smart we are and how much we know, and what a great idea you had, Tab, and boy, you're the smartest guy on the planet. And, and that's a problem, because your customers' needs are changing. There's all sorts of stuff going on out there, and you've lost touch with them. So that's why, if you want to start, what I'd recommend is that you go back and you do one thing, which I always recommend is, if you can only do one thing to solve that problem, is you take your list of customers, have your finance person, whatever, do it, and you put them in order, and you do it with 3 things. One is, who do we love? Meaning they're great customers. They don't argue on price. They tell us they love us. They give us references without us even asking. Who loves us? And then same sort of thing right there. You can hear their smile on the phone, and then order them by profit. And then look at the top of your list. Those are your best customers. Then assign those people to your top leaders and say, you know what? If you don't already have a relationship with these guys or whatever, I need you to make sure that you have one, establish one, and keep in touch with them, and just have conversations with them. Ask them how their business is going, what's going on in their world, etc. You'll begin to collect information from your best customers, which will then allow you to figure out how to attract more of those kinds of people. You'll start to see patterns. And in the book, I have a particular exercise that goes in a lot more depth on how to do that. I even write the email that you can send to them for you, and you can just fill in the blank to get that information to help you do that. That would be my biggest thing. The easiest thing to obviously go to your employees. And those of you who don't know, something called Start, Stop, Continue, or Start, Stop, Keep is a great thing to do. You go up to an employee and say, if you were me, what would you start doing that we're not doing? What would you stop doing that we are doing? Or what should we keep doing? And you ask your employees, and they'll give you lots of great information. If you just did those 2 constituencies, that would at least start to give you information that should unstick your growth.
Well, that was golden, just absolutely golden. Bill, appreciate you taking the time with us. Absolutely. And again, thank you. So let's give him a round of applause. And thanks Bill.
Everybody.
Welcome to Refiners. Refiners is an organization of business owners and business professionals that are looking to improve their business and personal performance, just like you. As a Refiners member, you will have the opportunity to build connections with like-minded individuals from your industry. Join our amazing community for free at refiners.io.